The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple against the evening sky. Henry Thompson's car rattled and jerked before sputtering to a halt in the middle of a deserted country road. He cursed under his breath, gripping the steering wheel with gnarled fingers. His old Ford had finally given out on him, miles away from home. "Perfect," Henry muttered, slamming his fist against the dashboard. "Just what I needed." The wind howled through the trees as the silence of the empty road crept in. Henry squinted out into the gathering darkness, hoping to see headlights in the distance. He wasn't the type to ask for help, but tonight he didn't have much of a choice. Minutes passed, and Henry's frustration grew. Just when he was about to curse the world again, a pair of headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, growing brighter as they approached. The car slowed and pulled up beside him. Henry's scowl deepened as the window rolled down, revealing a young black woman in the driver's seat. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Henry hesitated, his gut twisting. He wasn't used to accepting help, least of all from someone like her. But the darkness was closing in, and he didn't have many options. His pride fought with his practicality. Yeah, I guess I do," he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. The woman smiled, as if she hadn't noticed his reluctance. "Pop the hood. Let's see what we're working with." Henry watched in silence as she got out of her car and inspected his engine. Her confidence and calm demeanor unsettled him. She seemed too comfortable, too competent. It made him feel small, and he didn't like it. "What's your name?" he asked gruffly, his arms crossed over his chest. "Maya," she replied, wiping her hands on a rag she'd pulled from her car. "Looks like your battery's dead. I've got some jumper cables. We'll get you going in no time." Henry nodded, though he said nothing. His mind raced with bitter thoughts, memories of a time when men like him didn't take help from people like her. But those days were gone, weren't they? As Maya connected the jumper cables, Henry shifted uncomfortably, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. The kindness she showed him felt undeserved, and the tension between them was palpable, even if she didn't seem to notice. Minutes later, the engine roared back to life. "There you go," Maya said with a satisfied smile. "Should be good to go now." Henry grumbled a half-hearted thank you, though he could barely bring himself to say it. As Maya turned to leave, Henry was struck by the oddest feeling. Something about her lingered, something he couldn't quite place. Before she got back into her car, Maya glanced at him one last time, her eyes full of something Henry hadn't seen in a long time: empathy. "If you ever need help again, don't hesitate to ask," she said gently. Henry didn't respond. He watched her drive off into the night, the darkness swallowing her taillights. For a long time he sat there, the engine humming beneath him, but his thoughts were louder than the car. As he pulled back onto the road, the uneasy feeling followed him home, a strange weight settling in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that brief encounter had set something in motion, something that would change everything. The rain came down in heavy sheets the next morning, pattering against the windows of Henry's small house. The rhythmic sound did little to soothe the old man's restlessness. He sat in his worn armchair by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The memory of the previous night's encounter with Maya still nagged at him, like an itch he couldn't scratch. Why had she stopped to help him? And why had he accepted? His pride simmered, mixing uneasily with the gratitude he refused to acknowledge. He had never been one to accept help from anyone, much less a young black woman. It made him feel... what? Vulnerable? Weak? Henry scowled and took a long, bitter sip from his mug. He had no business feeling vulnerable. Not at his age. He was set in his ways, wasn't he? He had earned the right to live as he pleased, to believe what he believed, no matter what the world around him had become. But that look in Maya's eyes, empathy, he remembered it clearly, had stirred something in him. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper. It made him uncomfortable, as though she saw past the surface and into the parts of him he kept buried. and that frightened him more than he wanted to admit. I don't need her help. I don't need anyone's help. The thought looped in his mind, but it felt hollow. The rest of the day passed in much the same way. Henry moved about the house doing his usual routine, watering the plants, reading the paper, and making a simple dinner. But no matter what he did, the thought of Maya lingered. Her face kept flashing in his mind, her calmness in the face of his bitterness gnawing at him. As dusk settled, Henry decided to take a walk to the grocery store, hoping the fresh air would clear his head. He grabbed his old coat and stepped out into the damp evening, the cool air hitting his face like a slap. The walk to the store wasn't long, but each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by thoughts he couldn't shake. Inside the small, quiet grocery store, Henry went about his business, picking up the few items he needed. As he reached for a carton of milk, his chest suddenly tightened. He winced, pausing for a moment as a sharp pain shot through his body. Not now, he thought, gripping the shelf to steady himself. But the pain didn't let up. It spread across his chest, leaving him short of breath and lightheaded. His vision blurred, and the grocery store around him seemed to tilt. Panic bubbled up as he realized what was happening. He was having a heart attack. Henry's knees buckled and he crumpled to the ground. The world around him spun, his thoughts muddled by fear. He couldn't call out for help. His voice was trapped in his throat. And then, through the haze, he saw her. No, it can't be. But it was. Maya was there, just a few feet away, standing by the produce section. She rushed over without hesitation, her expression shifting from shock to determination. "Mr. Thompson, can you hear me?" Maya's voice cut through the fog of his panic. Henry managed a weak nod, though the pain was unbearable. Everything was spinning, and all he could hear was his own labored breathing. "Stay with me. I'm calling an ambulance," Maya said firmly, pulling out her phone. Within moments, she had the emergency line on the phone, her voice calm but urgent as she explained the situation. Henry felt her hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Despite the pain, her presence seemed to offer a strange sense of comfort. He didn't understand it. Why was she helping him again? After the way he had treated her? He felt a wave of shame mixed with his fear, but he was too weak to speak. Minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The paramedics worked quickly, loading Henry onto a stretcher and into the back of the vehicle. As the doors closed, Henry caught one last glimpse of Maya standing on the curb, her face etched with concern. He wanted to say something, to thank her, to apologize, but the words were lost as the ambulance sped off into the night. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the steady beeping of machines greeted Henry as he opened his eyes. The hospital room was bright, too bright for his liking, and the stiffness in his body told him he had been there for a while. He glanced around the room, trying to get his bearings. A nurse walked in, smiling warmly when she saw he was awake. "Good to see you're up, Mr. Thompson. How are you feeling?" she asked, checking his vitals. Henry grunted. "Like I got hit by a truck," she chuckled softly. "You had a heart attack, but you're stable now. You're lucky someone was there to help." Henry's mind immediately went to Maya. "That girl, the one who helped me." The nurse nodded. "She saved your life. If she hadn't called the ambulance so quickly, it could have been a lot worse." Henry didn't know how to respond. Maya had helped him again, without a second thought. And for what? He had done nothing to deserve it. In fact, he had gone out of his way to push her away. Yet here she was, a constant presence in his life, a beacon of kindness in his storm of bitterness. As the nurse left the room, Henry sat in silence, his thoughts swirling. For years he had lived in a bubble of his own making, filled with resentment and anger. He had built walls around himself, cutting off any chance for connection. But now, Maya had broken through those walls, and it terrified him. Later that day, as Henry lay in his hospital bed, the door to his room creaked open. He looked up to see Maya standing there, a tentative smile on her face. "I hope you don't mind me visiting," she said softly, stepping inside. "I wanted to see how you were doing." Henry's throat tightened. The words of gratitude stuck somewhere deep in his chest. He looked away, feeling the familiar sting of shame. "I'm fine," he muttered gruffly. Maya didn't seem bothered by his tone. She pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed, her hands folded in her lap. They sat in silence for a moment, the beeping of the machines the only sound in the room. "I'm glad you're okay," she said finally, her voice filled with sincerity. "When I saw you at the store, I was scared for a moment." Henry swallowed, his mouth dry. I didn't expect to see you again." Maya smiled. "I guess we keep running into each other, huh?" He gave a small nod, his eyes still avoiding hers. He felt a lump forming in his throat, the weight of everything he had believed pressing down on him. Maya's kindness was something he didn't know how to handle, something he had never experienced, not like this. Maya's gaze softened and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "It takes strength to admit when you've been wrong, Mr. Thompson, and it takes even more strength to change." Henry swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. He had spent so many years clinging to bitterness and prejudice, convinced that the world was against him. But now, with Maya sitting beside him, her kindness and compassion breaking down his defenses, he wondered if it was time to let go of the anger that had defined him for so long. For the first time in years, Henry felt the stirrings of hope. In the days that followed, Henry found himself thinking more and more about his conversations with Maya. Her visits had become a regular occurrence, and with each one, Henry felt his hardened exterior begin to crack. He still had his gruff moments, of course, old habits die hard, but there was something about Maya's presence that made him want to be better, to be kinder. One afternoon, while Henry was going through an old box of family photos in his attic, he stumbled upon something that stopped him cold. It was a photo of his late wife, Margaret, taken during a summer barbecue years ago. Margaret was smiling in the photo, her arms wrapped around a little girl. But it wasn't just any little girl, it was Maya. Henry's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the image. He hadn't realized it before, but now it all made sense. Margaret had worked with Maya's mother as a volunteer at the community center, helping families who were struggling. He had forgotten about those days, about how Margaret had been such a pillar of kindness in the neighborhood. He had been too wrapped up in his own misery to appreciate the work she had done for others. And now, here was Maya, grown and continuing her mother's legacy, helping people, helping him, without ever expecting anything in return. Henry sat down, the photo trembling in his hands. The weight of his past mistakes crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had been so wrong for so long, and now he could see it all so clearly. He had wronged people. He had wronged Maya. The next time Maya came to visit, Henry couldn't keep it inside any longer. He handed her the photo, his hands shaking as he did. I found this," he said quietly. Maya took the photo and gasped softly when she saw it. "That's me. And my mom, with your wife." Henry nodded, his throat tight. "Margaret. She always tried to help people. I didn't see it then, but now I realize I should have been more like her." Maya looked up from the photo, her eyes filled with emotion. "Your wife was a wonderful person, Mr. Thompson. She helped my mother when no one else would. She gave us hope." Henry's chest tightened with regret. "And I never even knew. I'm sorry, Maya. I'm so sorry." Maya reached out and placed her hand on his. "You don't have to apologize. My mother always believed in second chances. I do too." Tears filled Henry's eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of forgiveness. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. Free from the weight of his past, free from the bitterness that had held him captive for so many years. And as he looked into Maya's eyes, he knew that this was just the beginning of his journey toward redemption. Henry spent the following days in a haze of reflection. His mind constantly drifted back to the photo of Maya and his wife, Margaret. Every moment of kindness Margaret had shown Maya's family had been invisible to him back then, blurred by his anger and pride. The memories now swirled like a fog, clearing only to reveal how much he had missed. Maya continued to visit, but the dynamic between them was shifting. Henry no longer felt the need to keep her at arm's length. Instead, he found himself eager for their conversations, craving the companionship that Maya offered so freely. Despite the guilt that gnawed at him, Henry also began to feel something else, a desire to make things right, not only with Maya but with the community he had spent so long resenting. One afternoon, while Maya helped him plant flowers in the front yard, Henry broke the silence that had settled between them. "Maya," he began, his voice gravelly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something about me. About my past." Maya glanced up from the dirt, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I'm listening." Henry took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "I haven't always been, well, I haven't been a good man. For most of my life I held on to beliefs that I'm not proud of. I thought I was better than people like you, people of color. I believed in those things because that's what I was taught. And I'm ashamed of it." Maya didn't interrupt, her gaze steady as Henry spoke. "When Margaret and your mother were working together, I didn't understand what she was doing. I thought she was wasting her time helping people who didn't deserve it. And now, looking back, I realize I was the one who didn't deserve her kindness. Or yours." He paused, his throat tightening with emotion. "I'm trying to change, Maya. I know it won't erase the years of bitterness and hatred I've carried, but I don't want to be that man anymore." Maya was quiet for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she stood up, wiping her hands clean before walking over to Henry. She knelt down beside him, looking him directly in the eyes. "Mr. Thompson, change is hard, but the fact that you're willing to confront the man you used to be says a lot. I've seen people who refuse to change, who hold on to their hatred because it's easier than facing the truth. You're not that person anymore." Henry felt a wave of emotion rise within him, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "How can you be so forgiving?" Maya smiled softly. "Because I believe in people. I believe we can all change if we try hard enough. My mother taught me that. She believed in second chances, and so do I." Henry's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He had spent so many years building walls around himself, convinced that the world was full of enemies. But here was Maya, tearing those walls down with her kindness, with her faith in him, a faith he hadn't even had in himself. "I want to help," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want to make things right. I don't know how, but I'll do whatever it takes." Maya nodded, her smile growing. "We'll take it one step at a time." Henry's transformation wasn't easy. Old habits and beliefs didn't vanish overnight. There were moments when his temper flared, when the bitterness of the past tried to claw its way back into his heart. But every time he felt himself slipping, Maya was there, offering a gentle reminder of the man he was trying to become. Henry started spending more time at the community center where Maya worked. At first, he kept a low profile, unsure of how people would react to his presence. But slowly, he began to get involved, helping with small tasks, fixing things around the building, and even talking to the people who came in for support. It was awkward at first. Some of the people recognized him, remembering the man who had once scowled from his porch, glaring at anyone who didn't look like him. But over time, as they saw him helping, as they saw his determination to change, they began to accept him. And eventually, they began to trust him. One day, as Henry and Maya sat in the community center's garden, planting new flowers for the spring, Henry noticed a group of young boys playing nearby. They were roughhousing, laughing loudly, and Henry felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when he had been their age, before life had hardened him. Maya noticed his gaze. "They remind you of someone?" Henry nodded. "Yeah, me, a long time ago, back when I still thought the world was simple." Maya looked at him curiously. "What changed?" Henry sighed, leaning back against the bench. "Life. I grew up in a house where everything was black and white. People were either good or bad, depending on where they came from and what they looked like. I carried that with me for a long time. And then, Margaret got sick, and I didn't know how to handle it. I pushed everyone away, blamed the world for my problems. It was easier to be angry than to admit I was scared. Maya didn't say anything for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then she spoke, her voice gentle. "You're not that man anymore, Henry." Hearing his name on her lips felt like a balm to his soul. He smiled at her, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I hope not." Maya returned the smile, her gaze softening. "We all have the capacity for change. I've seen it in you." Henry felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of hope he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of it. As the months passed, Henry's involvement at the community center grew. He began mentoring some of the younger kids, sharing stories about his life, his mistakes, and the lessons he had learned. They listened, wide-eyed, as he spoke about his journey from bitterness to redemption, and Henry found himself filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in decades. Maya continued to be his guiding light, encouraging him to keep moving forward, even when the path wasn't easy. She had become like a daughter to him, filling the void left by the family he had lost. And in return, Henry had become a father figure to her, offering advice and support whenever she needed it. One day, as they worked together in the garden, Maya turned to Henry with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever thought about telling your story to a larger audience?" she asked. Henry frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've come a long way. Your story could inspire others, people who are stuck in their ways, people who don't believe they can change." Henry hesitated. The idea of sharing his story with the world was daunting. He had spent so many years hiding from the truth, and now Maya was asking him to put it all out there. "I don't know, Maya," he said slowly. "I'm not sure anyone wants to hear what an old man like me has to say." Maya smiled. "You'd be surprised. People need hope, Henry. They need to know that it's never too late to change. You could give them that." Henry considered her words, his heart pounding in his chest. Maybe she was right. Maybe his story could make a difference. And maybe, just maybe, it could help heal the wounds he had spent so long running from. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's do it." Henry stood at the edge of the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been one for public speaking. The crowd gathered in the community center was larger than he had expected. People of all ages, races, and backgrounds had come to listen. The spotlight felt heavy on him, but Maya's reassuring smile from the front row gave him strength. He glanced down at the speech he had prepared, his hands trembling slightly. "Why am I doing this?" he wondered. But then he looked up again, saw the hope in the eyes of the people before him, and remembered Maya's words. People need to know it's never too late to change. Taking a deep breath, Henry began. "I wasn't always the man you see standing here today," he started, his voice low but steady. "For most of my life, I lived in anger. I saw the world in black and white. I grew up believing that some people were better than others, that the color of your skin defined who you were and what you were worth, and I carried those beliefs with me for far too long." The room was silent as Henry spoke, his voice growing stronger with each word. He shared the story of his upbringing, the environment that had shaped his racist views, and how he had let bitterness take over his life after losing his wife, Margaret. "I shut myself off from the world, convinced that I didn't need anyone. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of change, scared of the world moving on without me, scared of confronting my own failings." He paused, glancing at Maya, who nodded encouragingly. "And then I met someone," Henry continued, his voice softening. "A young woman who showed me kindness when I didn't deserve it. A woman who saw me, not as the bitter old man I had become, but as someone who could be better, someone who still had a chance to change." Henry gestured to Maya, and all eyes turned to her. She smiled humbly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but proud of the man Henry was becoming. "Maya taught me what it means to forgive," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion. "She showed me that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to make amends. She helped me see the world in color again." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the crowd. "But this isn't just about me," Henry continued. "I'm not telling you this story because I want your pity. I'm telling you because I know there are others out there, others who feel trapped by their own anger, their own bitterness. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't have to be that way. You can change. You can be better. It's hard, and it's uncomfortable, but it's worth it." Henry looked out at the audience, his eyes scanning the faces of the people who had come to listen. He could see their emotions, the hope, the understanding, the willingness to believe that transformation was possible. "If I can change," Henry finished, his voice strong and clear, "then so can you." For a moment, the room was silent, and then slowly, the crowd erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, some wiping away tears, others nodding in agreement. Henry felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. As he stepped down from the stage, Maya was the first to greet him, her eyes shining with pride. "You did great," she said, giving him a hug. Henry smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." In the weeks that followed, Henry's speech became a turning point for both him and the community. His story spread beyond the walls of the community center, reaching people who had once been closed off, just like he had been. The small town, once divided by old prejudices, began to shift. Conversations were being had that had never been possible before, and Henry found himself at the center of it all. But not everyone was receptive to Henry's change. There were still people in town who clung to their beliefs, people who saw Henry's transformation as a betrayal. Old friends stopped talking to him, and some even made cruel comments when they passed him on the street. One day, as Henry walked to the community center, an old acquaintance, Joe Baker, confronted him outside a diner. Joe had been a part of Henry's social circle for years, back when they would sit around complaining about how the world had gone soft. "Henry," Joe said, crossing his arms, "I heard you've been spending a lot of time at that community center with those folks." Henry felt a pang of discomfort but didn't shy away. "Yeah, Joe, I have." Joe's face twisted in disdain. "I don't get it. You used to know what was what. You used to have principles. Now you're out here cozying up with people who don't belong." Henry took a deep breath, the words stinging more than he cared to admit. But instead of reacting with anger, he met Joe's gaze calmly. "I was wrong, Joe," Henry said. "I spent too many years hating people for no reason. It didn't get me anywhere. All it did was make me lonely and bitter." Joe scoffed. "So now you think you're better than us? Think you're some kind of hero for throwing away everything you stood for?" Henry shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just trying to be a better man. And I think you could too, if you let yourself." Joe stared at him, incredulous, before turning and walking away without another word. Henry watched him go, a mixture of sadness and resolve in his heart. He knew not everyone would change, but that wouldn't stop him from trying to be an example for those who might. Months turned into a year, and Henry's life continued to change in ways he had never imagined. He became a fixture at the community center, not just helping out, but mentoring others, young and old alike. His story inspired people from all walks of life to believe in the possibility of redemption, and more importantly, in the power of kindness. Maya, now a close friend, continued her work at the center, and together they created new programs to foster understanding and unity within the town. The community began to heal, and while there were still challenges, the progress was undeniable. One afternoon, as Henry sat on his porch sipping tea, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The man he had been, angry, isolated, lost, felt like a distant memory. He had found a new purpose, one rooted in compassion and connection. And for the first time in a long time, he was truly happy. Maya joined him on the porch, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed one to him and sat down beside him, both of them watching the sunset. "You know," Henry said, his voice thoughtful, "I never thought I'd live to see the day when I'd feel at peace with myself." Maya smiled. You've earned it, Henry. You've come a long way." Henry nodded, a deep sense of gratitude washing over him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Maya. You saved me." Maya shook her head. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a little push." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the warmth of the evening wrapping around them like a blanket. Henry's heart was light, his mind at ease. He had spent so many years clinging to the past, to old grudges and outdated beliefs. But now he had let them go, and in doing so, he had found something far more valuable, a life worth living. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft golden glow, Henry knew that his journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still people to help, still lives to touch. But for the first time, he faced the future with hope instead of fear. Because he had learned the most important lesson of all, that it's never too late to change. And that kindness, even in the smallest moments, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. As the years passed, Henry Thompson became a symbol of hope and change in his small town. His journey from bitterness and isolation to compassion and understanding resonated with those around him, proving that even the most deeply held beliefs could be transformed by kindness and empathy. Henry's friendship with Maya continued to grow, and together they helped bridge the divides that had once seemed insurmountable. Henry's story was shared far and wide, inspiring others to reflect on their own prejudices and consider the possibility of change. He dedicated the rest of his life to promoting understanding, advocating for equality, and showing that no one is too old, too stubborn, or too lost to find redemption. When Henry finally passed away, surrounded by the community he had once shunned, his legacy lived on, not just in the hearts of those who knew him, but in the lives of those who were inspired by his story. His journey became a testament to the power of forgiveness, the importance of second chances, and the transformative nature of love. Henry's story reminds us that change is always possible, no matter how late we may think it is. It challenges us to reflect on our own lives, our own beliefs, and the ways we interact with the world. If Henry could confront the darkness inside himself and choose a path of kindness and reconciliation, so can we. Take a moment today to think about the walls you've built, whether they're walls of prejudice, fear, or anger. Then ask yourself, what would it take to break them down? Who in your life deserves a second chance, or even a first? Change starts with one step, one act of kindness, one decision to be better. You don't have to make grand gestures or change the world overnight. Sometimes all it takes is a simple gesture of empathy, like Maya stopping to help Henry on the side of the road. Start small, look around, be kind. You never know whose life you might change, including your own. And remember, it's never too late to be the person you want to be.